Welcome to the annual 2019 Charter Vessel Orientation. This is
Joni C.
Melanie Berg,
Mike Atkins.
Renee Patrick.
your commercial services team. This annual orientation video contains the boater orientation and presentation by the park's wildlife, marine, and fisheries biologists and an update of our front country planning. Now please watch Glacier Bay's On the Water video before continuing with the rest of this presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Atkins. I'm a concession specialist here at Glacier Bay National Park, and welcome to the 2019 Commercial Services Boater Orientation for this year. We're trying something new. Previously we've had phone call-ins, or you've actually had to come here in person. So this is going to be posted online. Hopefully you've found it, and we're just going to give you a rundown on what's going on in the Bay for this summer. You probably have already seen the On the Water video, so I'm just going to try to expand on that with some information that is relevant to your commercial operations. Okay, so I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Bartlett Cove dock here in Bartlett Cove. It's a public use dock. It has a 3-hour max tie-up in a 24-hour period. If you have a dinghy less than 10 feet, you can use a designated area underneath the ramp. Portable water is available for our commercial use operators. Please use, if you have a designated meter, go ahead and use that. If you don't, there is a shared meter with a logbook to record your water usage. This is not a public water source, so you will be billed for your water usage. The fuel dock and pump out is available when the lodge is open. The Glacier Bay Lodge 2019 season starts May 24th and it goes to September 3rd. Hours for the fuel dock and pump out are 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. After 5 p.m. You'll have to call the lodge, and it may take up to 30 minutes for an attendant to arrive. To call the lodge, hail Glacier Bay Lodge on channel 16. Please do not leave your vessels docked at the fuel dock. It's for short-term fueling only. Trash and recycling. Take your trash with you and dispose of outside the park. Use of NPS solid waste receptacles is prohibited. Showers and laundry are also available at the lodge. Here you see the guide for Park Waters for concessioners. It highlights a lot of the restrictions that are in effect in the Bay during the summer season. We have whale waters, we have non-motorized areas, we have areas that are closed, and we also have areas with noise restrictions. This map is in the 2019 edition of the Fairweather Reporter, along with a lot of the other information that that I will be throwing out here today. So please reference this map if you have any questions. Another thing I want to point out is don't cut Lester Point. For those of you who may not be familiar with what this means, is when you are exiting Bartlett Cove, please maintain a mid-channel course. Don't cut the point, basically. So let's move ahead. Whale waters. When you're in whale waters, there are a few things that you need to know. Maintain a distance of 1 nautical mile from shore or a mid-channel course. Maintain a maximum speed of 20 knots in the lower bay. Vessels may not operate within 1/4 mile of a whale, and vessels may not pursue or alter course to come within 1/2 nautical mile of a whale. In certain situations, U.S. Coast Guard navigational rules supersede park regulations. What that means is if you are need to avoid a whale, and that means you have to alter your course, and you're with less than 1 nautical mile for shore, or you have to change from a mid-channel course, that is okay. Never assume whales are aware of you. Make noise, reduce speed if you believe whales are nearby. And if you do have an incident or a collision, please call into KWM 20 Bartlett Cove on VHF channel 16. If animals change their behavior, you are too close. The park requests that you maintain 100 yards from nesting seabirds and Steller sea lions hauled out on rocks or land. And once again, maintain 1/4 mile from whales. Make noise if you think you are on top of one. Also keep 1/4 mile away from harbor seals hauled out on ice and land. There is no feeding or hunting of wildlife within the park. Firearms are permitted but may not be discharged. Collect unoccupied seashells and edibles only. Take photographs and memories of everything else. No pets are allowed ashore in the backcountry. Sport fishing requires an Alaska state fishing license, and all rules, regulations, state of Alaska apply while you're in Glacier Bay. Drones are prohibited and may be confiscated if seen taking off or landing on a commercial vessel. Finally, any filming for commercial purposes requires a special use permit. Briefly, bear safety. Vessel noise will disturb wildlife, so don't get too close to a bear on shore. If you are on shore, carry bear spray. Stay alert. Make noise. Travel in groups. Know bear safety protocols if you go ashore. And again, there's a lot of great information in the Fairweather Reporter, and later on in this presentation, you will hear from our resident bear expert who will elaborate on a lot of bear stuff. Some safety concerns to be aware of while you're in Glacier Bay. Glaciers and icebergs are one of the main draws to the park. While you're in the bay, maintain a distance of 1/4 mile from the face of glaciers. This is a U.S. Coast Guard recommendation. Give icebergs a wide berth when you're transiting around them. Tides, currents, and winds. There is up to a 25-foot tidal swing in the upper reaches of the bay. In Sadakity Narrows, there is up to 7-knot current. Bottlenecks will occur at inlet entrances. Please add up to 30 minutes for tides for the upper arms of the bay. Anchorages, things you should think about or consider. What is the ice situation? What is the wind doing? What is the substrate? Be aware of shallow and muddy areas, submerged rocks, landslide potential, other marine traffic. Not sure? Consult your chart. Do you have a depth finder? Do you have somebody on watch? Incident reporting. Immediately report violations of service regulations and all other applicable laws. Incidents could include any incidents that result in personal injury to a visitor or crew member that requires medical attention other than basic first aid, any marine casualties or oil spills, any wildlife incidents involving collision, injury, property damage, or threat to humans or wildlife. Other incidents that may affect area resources such as fires, hazardous material spills, or violations of state and federal law must also be reported. Reporting incidents, or emergencies. The best way to do that is hail VHF Channel 16, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. You can also call NPS Dispatch at 907-697-2651. Okay, so just about at the end of this portion of the presentation, just want to go over some things for our charter vessel and tour vessel operators. A lot of these things I'm going to go over here are all in your contract. If there's one thing you could take away from all of this, piece of advice for me, know your concession contract. It really defines what you can and cannot do and will answer a lot of questions that you have. So anyways, this is the commercial boater orientation, and it's valid for all of 2019. There, I think you already saw the attendance sheet. This is available online. Once you watch this, please go ahead and sign that and forward it on to the Commercial Services Office here at Glacier Bay. Only concessionaires are permitted in Glacier Bay and Dundas Bay June 1st through August 31st. What this means is if you have, if you're a concessionaire and you have an allocated, daily allocated spot within Glacier Bay proper, you are also allowed to go into Dundas Bay for that day as well. Operators must contact the visitor information station each time they enter and exit the park, either by radio by hailing KWM20 Bartlett Cove on channel VHF 12 or 16, or by phone call to 907-697-2627. Let the park know the number of passengers and crew on your vessel. Automatic identification systems, otherwise known as AIS, must be turned on while operating in park waters. If you have a tender, a skiff, or a DIB, they must have their own permit if you want to operate them at the same time as the larger vessel. So if you have a tender or a skiff, you want to get off the boat, the main boat or the mothership, if you will, must be anchored up and stationary. Then you can operate a tender or skiff under your contract. Activity reports are due no later than the 5th of every month for the previous month. Charter concessioners must notify the Parks Commercial Service Office of a canceled charter vessel use day prior to 9 a.m. of its scheduled entry into Glacier Bay by calling the Commercial Services Office at 697-2567, or you can email us at glbaconcessions@nps.gov. New vessels operating under concessioner's permit must first get park approval before entering park waters. Lastly, the concessioner's resource page has updated schedules, forms, and other information that you'll find helpful. You can access all this information at the Concessioner Resources webpage, and you can see the address below that. If you'd like me to email that to you as well, please drop me a line. So that's it for this portion of the boater orientation. We have a couple more presenters coming up, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the orientation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanya Lewis. I'm the Parks Terrestrial Wildlife Biologist as well as the Research Coordinator. My email is right here. If you want to follow up with any comments or questions, I'm happy to respond. And if you see me around the park this summer, introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you. So I'm going to talk about some research updates that you might be interested in, and then talk about ways that we encourage you to minimize disturbance to wildlife in the park. And we'll touch base on the heavy use locations for the tour vessels, as well as reporting off-vessel shore excursions. All right, so obviously people love to view wildlife, and it's a very important part of people's visit to Glacier Bay, and we encourage people to observe the natural surroundings and the wildlife, but I want to start with a couple cartoons that illustrate that this can be uncomfortable and disruptive for wildlife at times. So it is our job to minimize this disturbance. Many of you know for the last 2 years we've had a research project looking directly at responses of wildlife to tourism, and that was led by a graduate student, Mira Sitzma, and her advisor, Laura Prue from the University of Washington, and myself. And our main question was to figure out if wildlife change their activity patterns when humans are present at a site compared to when humans are not present. And we utilized the tour vessel heavy use locations and camper drop-offs to manipulate levels of human use at 10 study sites in 2017 and 18. And we had 4 remote motion sensor cameras at each site, as well as 2 of the cameras were also doing time-lapse photography. And they were focused downward at a low angle for capturing wildlife specifically. And we also did small mammal trapping and songbird point count surveys as a part of another part of the study, looking at succession of animals across the chronosequence. So we got 880,000 photos, and the most common mammal in our photos were people. Over 150,000 photos of people, and most of these were from the waist down because we had our cameras directed towards more of the wildlife species. 5,800 brown bears, 3,400 black bears, 6,900 moose, and 570 wolves. We also captured photos of marmots and marten and wolverines and coyotes, but the main 4 species we looked at were brown bear, black bear, moose, and wolves. So this is the only data slide I'm going to show. These data are being analyzed right now. Mira is working on publications. And so this is somewhat preliminary, but I'll talk you through this slide. Basically what we did was separate out Bartlett Cove, which was one of our study areas, from the rest, because Bartlett Cove gets way more use, in the tens of the thousands people per year. So the Bartlett Cove human activity on the x-axis, and the animal activity is on the y-axis, and in Bartlett Cove it's signified by the yellow dots or yellow circles. And there's 4 different plots, brown bear, black bear, moose, and wolves. And the purple triangles are the other 9 sites in the backcountry. And if you look at the brown bears, the upper left-hand chart, you can see that as human use increased in the purple triangles, brown bear detections decreased to about 50 minutes per week, after which there were no more brown bear detections. Now you should keep in mind that the human minutes per week is based on camera data, not the actual amount of time people were on the beach. So it's an index of human activity. If you look in Bartlett Cove, as human use increases, brown bear detections stay relatively stable. And if you look over at black bears, you see a very similar pattern where in the backcountry, the other sites, the other 9 sites, the purple triangles, as human use increases, black bear use decreases, but in Bartlett Cove it stays relatively high. And then the same for moose in the lower left side. So this indicates that in Bartlett Cove there's some level of habituation. The animals get used to people, and but in the backcountry there's a certain level of use in which these 3 species decrease their use of an area. For wolves in the lower right, that was true as well in the backcountry sites, and in Bartlett Cove there were no wolf detections, so it's just a steady 0. So what this speaks to is that it's really good to concentrate use of people so that animals can habituate or avoid the area and still have access to other sites where there are very low levels or no levels of human use. And so the park will take this into account in future backcountry management, but for now that's basically the overall take-home message of this study so far. So other projects, research projects we have going on in the park. We have over 40 active research permits this year. Glacier Bay National Park monitors marine mammals, including humpback whales, harbor seals, sea otters, along with USGS. We have an inventory and monitoring vital sign program where we monitor oceanography, climate, kittlets, murrelets, and fresh and ocean water contaminants and several other vital signs. Dina Matkins monitors killer whales in the park. Stellar sea lions are of special interest to Alaska Department of Fish and Game because in the park we have a threatened species of, or threatened population segment, the western population segment of sea lions. And that includes a camera that's on South Marble that is looking at brands that indicate animals coming from rookeries in different areas in Alaska to South Marble. So you may see that camera. We are going to try to get it a little more well hidden this year, so hopefully you won't see it. We monitor nesting seabirds, including a yearly Tlingit gull egg harvest. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about seabirds. And we're starting a 2-year project on mountain goats, looking at mountain goats population genetics to identify goat populations that might be vulnerable to climate change. And that'll be in Glacier Bay as well as Klondike Gold Rush. Alaska Department Fish and Game has a wolf study going on right now. There's 2 wolves that were collared in Gustavus that go in and out of the park. And so they're trying to get an idea of what the home range of these wolves is and what their diets are in the summer and the winter. And there's a project starting up this year, collaboration with University of Alaska Southeast and the Park Service, looking at changes in ice in Johns Hopkins Inlet and using photography. So there will be several cameras posted at high elevation in Johns Hopkins. And we're looking at the changes in ice from the glacier and how that relates to seal habitat. And then finally, there is a glacial photography project resuming this year. Bruce Molnia from USGS will be revisiting sites that some of which have been visited up to 80 years and looking at changes in glaciers over time. So that's a very brief overview. If you want to know more, I encourage you to look on our website. We have research highlights that we're trying to get updated, and there are several new ones on there now, so check it out and find out what you can. So on the topic of minimizing disturbance to wildlife, as you all know, we have several closures in the park to protect ground nesting birds. And these are very similar, or they are the same as in the last few years, so there's no new closures this year. And from your operating plan, we ask that you stay 100 yards at least from colonies of nesting seabirds, a colony being more than 5 nesting pairs, and 50 yards from solitary nesting seabirds like black oyster catchers. If you do come upon some colonies that are new to you or you don't know if we're aware of, please let us know. These colonies move around and we're always trying to keep track of where they are.
Okay, stop for a second. I just want to move this cable. I'm getting some audio.
Oh, yeah. Shoot.
And maybe your hair is starting to Okay.
Do you want me to redo that one?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So another important resource that we would like to protect and minimize disturbance to is predators and scavengers of spawning salmon. This is a very important resource for multiple wildlife species, and we don't have a lot of salmon streams in the park compared to the rest of coastal Alaska because many of the streams were so recently glaciated. So for tour vessels, we ask that you stay at the mouth of these streams when there is active salmon spawning. So if you see salmon or evidence of scavenging along the bank of a salmon stream, we ask that you stay below mean high tide and view the spawning salmon from there. And the exception to that, of course, is the Bartlett River, where people are welcome to walk up the salmon stream. So our biggest goal with bears is to minimize bear-human conflicts. And a basic way, a start, is to educate yourself and passengers about bear safety. We have a lot of information on our website at the bottom of the page there. But the most important thing is to keep food and gear under your control at all times when you are on the shore of Glacier Bay. And that's because if bears get food from people or learn that gear is fun to play with, they will come back looking for more from people in the future. So for the protection of all of us, make sure food and gear is under control at all times. And we ask that you minimize disturbance and displacement of bears. Bears are awesome to watch on the beach from boats. And a lot of times we can do that without disturbing them. But if we get too close or we make too much noise, they can be displaced, and then they're missing out on that important foraging opportunity. So if you see a bear that's looking at you or starts to move away, please increase your distance, and we ask that you stay at least 100 yards from bears on the beach at all times. Now, if you do have any problems with bears on the shoreline of Glacier Bay, please let us know. We put that information out to campers, to other backcountry users, and it's really important that we all know places where there might be potential conflicts. So people make trails when they walk repeatedly in areas, and what we try to do is to minimize those social trails in the wilderness. These photos are from Reed Inlet on the west side, There's a maze of trails, sometimes through wetlands, many of which go to the same location. So what we're trying to do is concentrate use on one of these trails, ideally the most hardened trail, and let the others regrow. So we ask that you concentrate people on the single trails, and then when people want to disperse, let them do that in non-vegetated areas. Luckily, we have lots of those. We have the intertidal zone, we have glacier outwashes. That's where people can wander around freely. But in the vegetation, we ask that they stay on the main trail. And we have those routes within the heavy use locations designated by GPS. So if you need those, let us know and we can get those to you. And if you come upon any social trailing that is developing, that's new to you, or is particularly messy, please let us know so we can check it out. All right, thank you very much. If you have any questions or feedback, don't hesitate to contact me or the concession staff, and have a great summer.
Hi, my name is Chris Gabriel. I'm a wildlife biologist at Glacier Bay National Park, and I've been asked to help with the tour and charter vessel orientations. So I'm going to share some information with you that'll help you and your visitors in Glacier Bay. So the goals of my talk are to briefly summarize the park regulations about marine mammals, recognizing that some of you are new to Glacier Bay and some of you have been operating here for many years. So we'll try to strike the right balance and give you the right level of detail and information about where to go for more information. My second goal is to provide you guys with current information that you can share with your passengers and your naturalists. And I just want to emphasize that I really think an open line of communication is very important. You guys are our eyes on the water as well as our liaison to many park visitors, and we appreciate what you do. And but also ask that if you see something unusual, I'd like to encourage you to report that either to the Viz or to the Sandlance as soon as you can. And I'll give you some information about exactly what information I'm referring to. And I also have some tips from my years on the water just on how to keep marine mammals and people safe in Southeast Alaska. So Glacier Bay is special for a couple different reasons, and one is that we have three particular species that are of concern in Glacier Bay: the humpback whale, the Steller sea lion, and the harbor seal. And they're special because there are federal regulations that ensure that Glacier Bay complies with the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. So some of you have been down the road before. You may be thinking, hey, wait a minute, our humpback whales are no longer endangered in Southeast Alaska. But I just wanted to remind us all that the Hawaii population segment was delisted, so it's no longer on the endangered species list. However, we have whales that are in from the Mexico population segment that also use Southeast Alaska and Glacier Bay. So some of the whales in Southeast Alaska and Glacier Bay are in that threatened stock. And similarly with the Steller sea lions, there are two stocks. One is not listed, that's the eastern stock, and the other is the western stock, which is listed as endangered on the endangered species list. Cape Suckling at about 144 degrees west is the dividing line between the two. However, you know animals, they're not going to pay attention to the lines that we draw on a map. So we have Steller sea lions in Glacier Bay and on the outer coast that are from the endangered stock as well as the eastern non-listed stock. And we want to do all we can to keep these guys safe. I'm just going to segue to something else that's unique about Glacier Bay, and that is the Bartlett Cove hydrophone. We've had that anchored to the bottom since 2000, and we're learning all sorts of amazing things about the world of underwater sound. For example, I'll just give you a couple quick ones. One is that male harbor seal roars during their mating season in May, June, and July are the most common biological sound we hear. We've discovered things about humpback whale calls that they probably use to contact each other. We've documented the unusual offshore type of killer whale. Even though I've never personally seen one, my hydrophone has heard them 3 different times over the years. We also paid attention to vessel sounds. We've found that vessels are much quieter at slower speeds than they are at 20 knots. And also that we've determined that about 60% of the time in summer, if you were listening on the hydrophone, you would hear one or more vessels. And finally, occasionally we've heard seal bombs on the hydrophone, which are very audible underwater explosions that we can figure out where they are based on what we're hearing. But I want to go back and say one thing. If you would like more information about these discoveries, what you should do is do an internet search for Glacier Bay acoustics reports. And I've really just brushed the surface here of all the things we've been able to learn with the hydrophone. The hydrophone is kind of vulnerable, however. It's a cable on the seafloor, and you can help by avoiding anchoring or bottom fishing in the area where the hydrophone and the cable is. This is not a regulation, this is just a request. And another important request is if you do happen to encounter the cable in Bartlett Cove, please report it right away, especially if you think you've damaged it. And the reason I say this is that it makes it much more easy to repair if I know where the damage occurred. And believe me, I feel this very deeply. Please call the Viz or the Sandlance if you think you've encountered the hydrophone. And just speaking of that, the amount of science that we do in Glacier Bay, one really good way to keep up with the latest marine science as it happens is called the Currents Glacier Bay Ocean Science Hub. And we invite you and your naturalists and any members of the public who might be interested to either read the blog posts at the web link that's shown here, or also you can subscribe and I'll send you an email when a new blog post comes out. And there are probably 5 or 6 a year. Some years are different. But you can learn about anything from wolverines and deer mice to tracking fisheries harvests. So there's a lot of good stuff on there. So that's a good place to keep up to date. And speaking of hot off the press, the 2018 Humpback Whale Report has just been released. It's not, I haven't got a Currents blog post on it yet, but you can find it on the web at the IRMA site that's shown here. Janet Nielsen, my longtime co-worker, is the main author, and I worked with her on this, as well as Lou Taylor Thomas. And you'll notice that the format of the report is a little bit different than it was in previous years. We are trying to make it a little more accessible and shorter. So it's 6 pages, and it's easy to get all the information you want. For those of you who aren't aware that we do an annual whale report, here's the situation. Since 1985, Glacier Bay National Park has had a long-term population monitoring program for humpback whales. We use small vessels, including the Sandlance, which is shown here. And if you see us out on the water, feel free to stop and say hello or call us on the VHF. And so we just, in the study area that's shown in blue on this map, we go out 5 days a week pretty much and find as many different humpback whales as we can. And because we use consistent methods and consistent amount of effort every year, we're able to do really specific counts of how many different animals we've seen and what they're doing. So there are key findings, and I'll warn you, most of this news is not very good. We documented only 100 unique humpback whales last year in 2018, which is our lowest count since 2002. This means that whale abundance has declined about 50% since it peaked in 2013. And this change was especially dramatic in Glacier Bay, where we identified only 45 whales, which is down 72% from our high year of 161 whales in 2013. So it's a pretty noticeable and dramatic decline. If you've been out on the water here a lot, you probably noticed it. We're also noticing some reproductive anomalies, and I'll go over that a little bit more, and really kind of to look under the hood of these results in terms of just the count of whales. What that means is that many of the whales that we've cited here year after year are out there, either have moved or have died, and we haven't seen many of them. But I'll go over that. And we've seen some thin whales and whales with weird skin. So we're going to dive in here. So this graph shows the whale counts that we got from the Sandlance and other vessels over the years, starting in 1985, and so on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis, ending in 2018, showing our 100 whale count. In yellow, over the 2013 number, you'll see that we saw 239 whales in Glacier Bay and Icy Strait that year, so that was our peak. And that kind of, the population was kind of going up at about 5% a year, starting in 1985 to 2013. And then we got this dramatic decline. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, about why that might be happening in the next slides. We've also noticed, along with the decrease in numbers, 5 consecutive years of calving anomalies. In other words, there aren't different numbers, there are fewer calves, and some of them appear to be dying. So this started in 2014 when an unprecedented number of calves were missing by mid-season, and none of the remaining calves, in other words, the ones that were still with their mom at the end of the summer, none of them have been resighted in subsequent years, which is odd. Most times we see them in future years. In 2015, we had relatively few calves, and none of those have been resighted. In 2016, there was only 1 calf born in the population, and they both appeared to be abnormally thin. And that was the lowest birth rate that we had seen for the whole monitoring program since 1985. 2017, we had 2 calves, the moms were thin, and 1 had lost her calf by mid-July. So that was pretty low birth rate. And then we finally got to a 0 birth rate because in 2018, we had only 1 mother with a calf in our study area. The mom was thin, and by mid-August, she was no longer with her calf. In other words, we saw her and no calf. So that was the first time that we have documented total reproductive failure in our population. So as you might imagine, we'd be really excited to hear from folks about any mother-calf pairs that they have seen. On the bright side, the word on the street is in Hawaii, the numbers of calves are actually getting a little better. In Hawaii, they had low whale numbers and low calf numbers in recent years. And definitely National Marine Fisheries, they got their eye on the ball on this, but the numbers do seem to be coming up. So hopefully this summer we'll see a couple more calves in the Glacier Bay area too. And I just wanted to briefly talk about what these whales that we were calling regulars. So these are whales that have been seen continuously, and meaning every year for 10 years or more. So we have 66 of these whales. And overall, up to 2018, 68% of them have had 1 or more breaks in their sighting history in the Glacier Bay area since that time. And it's not just the older whales, and it's not just the younger whales, it's all different ages of whales. So whatever it is, if these whales have moved because they needed to go somewhere else to find food, it's affecting all the different age classes, or some of them may actually have died during this, whatever this ecological change is that's causing this. But we miss them. These whales are individuals that we'd seen, every year for 30 or more years, and we're hoping they're going to be back. And on that note, there was a little good news. In the previous year, whale 219 had been gone and came back. And in 2018, I was so happy to see whale 581 over near Point Adolphus. And she's a whale that was first sighted in 1992 and is really renowned for her productivity. She's raised at least 13 different calves, the most of any female in our study. And she's a great grandmother. So she was alive and well over there, right where she belonged for part of 2018. So that was good. So these whales have a lot of mysteries. They probably have some tricks up their sleeve and where they go and where they've been. And I wish they could tell me the stories, but they can't. One thing, as I mentioned in the mother-calf slide, some of the whales are looking what we call skinny. And so I just wanted to show a couple different examples of that, what I'm talking about, and maybe you'll notice on the water as well. So in the top photo, you're seeing kind of that whale has really bad skin. Those are whale lice on this whale that's looking very unhealthy. And then that bulge is its rib cage, essentially. So that blubber layer has been reduced to the point that you're actually seeing the structure, the underlying skeleton of the whale. Same with that second photo up near the blowhole at the left. You're seeing the shoulder blade of the whale. And then in the bottom photo, similar, what we kind of call it, quote unquote, peanut head. In other words, the head of the whale will look really big because it doesn't have the blubber layer right behind the blowhole. So we're just really trying to develop a protocol to be really systematic about this. But what we've been able to glean so far is that 2017 was the number, like almost 25% of whales that we saw were skinny. and that improved a little bit in 2018. So we're trying to keep track of that, and there's a lot going on in the research world about health assessment. And then also, we over the years we've seen some really strange skin conditions, and I think really these kind of just get down to whales that are really not very healthy. We had the Taz reported to us, a whale, and it sent us this photo on the upper left of a whale that was peck slapping, but then it was actually bleeding as it was doing that. So why was the whale's skin in such bad shape that occurred? Last year in the upper right, we've just been documenting some strange skin conditions. I guess I'll leave it at that. And we don't really know why. And then in the lower left, what you'll see is this, what we call bumps, quote unquote bumps. A veterinarian would call that nodular dermatitis. These are lesions of some kind that many researchers are studying, and we don't exactly know what they're caused by, but they are something that's kind of a long-term condition. It's not something that the whale eventually seems to drop dead at the end of having bumps. Anyway, we're trying to get to the bottom of that one. So just wanted to mention these things just to open your eyes next time you're seeing whales on the water. So just a quick synopsis. Our whale numbers, our calving and juvenile survival and site fidelity and body condition are changing, and we have seen changes in group size and feeding behavior, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So the big question is, so are these missing whales, did they relocate, or what's the situation? So how can we try to answer this question? One thing that we did, and maybe you were one of the folks who received this, Most Wanted Whales. I think it's 3 pages of kind of our most conspicuous and easy to identify and whales you might see around. We have a PDF of those. If you would like to get a copy, if you haven't got one already, I'd be happy to send you one, so just contact me. So just kind of getting eyes on the water to report whales and submit photos. And we also circulated these photos and really at this point our entire photo catalog to what's called happywhale.com, and that's an automated matching system that's kind of just getting its feet under it in Alaska and the North Pacific, but we've learned some good information letting the computer do the hard work of finding out where our different whales have been. We haven't really found many of our really most wanted whales using Happy Whale yet, but it's a good method. And I just wanted to say that the National Marine Fisheries Service funded surveys throughout Southeast Alaska in 2016, 17, and 18. And this map shows the different areas that were covered. And we call it SPLISH. We're surveying the population because there was a previous study named SPLASH, maybe you know about. And so I just want the blue lines on the map show what area we covered. And so Glacier Bay is kind of its own fishbowl, and so we wanted to make sure that the results that we're finding in our little area aren't like unique. Maybe it's Glacier Bay and Icy Straits problem. Well, what the kind of the bottom line results from this larger study is all of the different research groups were noting lower numbers of whales and very few calves in all 3 of those years. So it's not just something that's happening really locally, fortunately or unfortunately. But we know, anyway, it's a wider spread issue. The other thing we're doing to answer that question about relocation is widening our search to British Columbia. So we've made some contacts with different research groups that have humpback whale catalogs in various places in British Columbia, and we've sent them our photos. We've found a couple of our whales, but certainly not large numbers of them. So British Columbia folks are talking about how they're seeing more whales, but we're not sure that indicates a widespread whales moving from Southeast Alaska down to British Columbia. That does not seem to be what's happening. And one way you can help is actually to use this thing called Whale Alert Alaska. It's a free downloadable app for Android or for Apple. And what you do with that app is every time you are on the water and see a whale or see a large group of whales, you can decide how frequently you want to report whales, because you're going to be probably seeing a lot of them. Just make a dot on the map. And the great thing about the app is that if you are not on the internet when you are making your sighting, it will save your sighting and make it when you get back to Wi-Fi or to cell service. So that's good. Another thing you can help with is to report stranded marine mammals, and especially whales, of course, as soon as possible to the Viz or to the SandLance on VHF 16. The data that we get from these carcasses and the knowledge we get from when there's an injured or sick individual are just priceless to understanding what's going on with all these different populations. Harbor porpoise are of really high interest, especially, so make a special effort on those, and again, call the Viz or the SandLance if you see something. So the second question is whether the humpback whales ate themselves out of house and home. Is that why their population numbers have fallen? And the answer is maybe. Maybe that's part of it. I think that there are indications of a broader ecological change. So if it was just humpback, if it was just carrying capacity for this one species that's been really successful in the past decade, we'd expect to be the results to be just about humpbacks. However, there are things happening with salmon and cod and murres and all parts of the marine food web, and that points to larger ecological changes. And just something closer to home, we just took a quick look at our harbor porpoise numbers, because when we're out on whale surveys, we document all marine mammals that we see within 100 meters of the boat, and we were surprised to find that the harbor porpoise numbers are down pretty significantly in the last couple of years too. So whatever food availability issue, I guess to me this points to a food availability issue that is affecting numerous species. So many of you will be aware that Glacier Bay has had whale protection regulations in place for many years. I'm going to briefly go over the whale regulations as well as the ones applying to the other marine mammals. And, but I will encourage you please to go and read them for yourself in detail, because if you're unfamiliar with these, there are some nuances that I might not cover in enough depth for you to get the whole picture. So approaching a humpback whale within a quarter mile is prohibited in the entire park. So that means not just Glacier Bay, but all the park waters. And there are areas of course and speed vessel restrictions, which we all call whale waters, that are designated by the superintendent when whales aggregate in a particular area. And on the map on the right, you'll see that area in the lower bay that you'll need to go mid-channel or more than 1 mile offshore in the whale waters. In the lower bay, in that same area, the speed limit for vessels is 20 knots between May 15th and September 30th. And then when the whales arrive and start to aggregate in that area, the superintendent designates a 13-knot speed limit. And we announce that by press release that you'll be getting from the Commercial Services Division. And in those areas, in the area in the lower bay, you have to stay mid-channel or 1 mile offshore if you're a vessel of greater than 18 feet or greater. And outside of whale waters, there are no speed limits for vessels, but it's a good idea to use your best judgment and stay safe out there. One thing to note is that sometimes, as we said, the whales don't read the regulations. The whales might be in mid-channel in an area where you're expected to stay mid-channel by regulation. And it's accepted practice in Glacier Bay that if the whales are in mid-channel, what you should do is alter course as necessary to avoid them. So in other words, don't stick with the regulation, stick with the spirit of the regulation sometimes rather than the actual regulation in order to meet the goal. I guess that's the best way to say it. Another couple tips about for safe whale encounters. Humpback whales, large baleen whales, do not have echolocation. So some people would think that they're like a dolphin. They have that sonar that they know where you are at all times. Well, I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. If you're silent, in other words, if you're in a kayak or a drifting vessel, especially if you've been sitting there for a while, they have no idea that you're there. And they also are very focused on their own social life and their own feeding. So they are they're distracted, and so if you want to make your presence known, what you need to do is knock on the hull or make some sort of noise on the boat that will be audible in the water. And I would certainly recommend doing that if you see a whale heading for you. In the lower right, my point is it's never a good idea to be in the path of a whale. And so you should do what you can to stay out of that situation. In Glacier Bay proper, in park waters completely, the quarter-mile approach regulation helps you and your guests stay safe, but realizing that different situations arise, and so I thought these tips might help. So if you're outside of Glacier Bay National Park, I just wanted to refresh you on the rules and give you information about where you can look on NOAA's site, the Alaska Humpback Whale Approach Regulations. And these have been in place since 2001, so I'm sure you're familiar with them. But under these regulations, you're not allowed to approach within 100 yards of a humpback whale. You're not allowed to place your vessel in the path of an oncoming whale so that the whale surfaces within 100 yards. And you are required to operate your vessel at a slow, safe speed when near a humpback whale. To go back to Glacier Bay, so here we are back in Glacier Bay, talking about different marine mammals. Many of you will be familiar with the regulations for approaching South Marble Island to protect the sea lions that are hauled out there. This map shows the 100-yard approach limit area, which is on the north and south, and then the 50-yard approach limit area was designed to allow people to have close access to the seabird colonies. However, sometimes there are sea lions in those areas, and so what you need to know is that at any distance from South Marble or another place where a sea lion is hauled out, if the sea lions are changing their behavior because of your vessel's presence, you're likely to be violating the Marine Mammal Protection Act or the Endangered Species Act. So it's your responsibility not to change the behavior of the animals and abide by the approach limits as needed. And if you're not familiar, that map is probably something you should study in detail and read those regulations. Harbor seals are protected in various places in Glacier Bay, including the Spider Island haul-out, but the motorized vessels are not allowed there, so I'm not going to cover that. But in Johns Hopkins Inlet, between July 1st and August 31st, there are regulations that prohibit operating any vessel, including a kayak, within a quarter nautical mile of a harbor seal hauled out on ice, except if safe navigation requires that, and then still trying to maintain the quarter-mile distance from concentrations of seals. And in Johns Hopkins in that time period, operating a vessel at more than 10 knots speed through the water is prohibited. And harbor seals are, when they're in Johns Hopkins Inlet, it's the pupping season, so they're trying to raise their pups, and then there's another part of the season in August where they're trying to molt. So they're very vulnerable during these times, and that's why these regulations are important. It's always a good idea to just enjoy wildlife from a distance using binoculars and, again, making sure that you're not changing the behavior of the animals. And there obviously are other whales and marine mammals inside Glacier Bay National Park. We don't have special regulations for those, but you should use the marine mammal guidelines that NOAA put out. The website there will show you where to find those for all the different other species of marine mammals that you'll find in Glacier Bay. And again, those guidelines focus on not changing the behavior of the animal, staying as far away as you can, and just being, not staying very long either. So take a look at those. All right, so given all that information, I thought I would boil it down to a few take-home messages. The first one is that marine mammal populations in the North Pacific are changing. And while some of those factors are mysterious and or not really in our direct control, what we can do to help is to give these marine mammals the benefit of the doubt. And one way to do that is to abide by all the different course and speed restrictions, approach regulations, and just the personal choices that you make out on the water that will help protect those marine mammals as well as your visitors, because sometimes there are safety concerns with marine mammal approach. I would ask that you report mother-calf pairs to the Sand Lance on VHF 16 or to the Viz, and we'll get the word through them eventually, but sometimes that real-time call on the radio will be really helpful because we'll be really interested in documenting those. We also ask that you report stranded marine mammals to the Viz right away. And if you snag the hydrophone cable, please also report that right away. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for doing what you can to share the best available information with visitors to the park. I know you guys are out there, you're the eyes on the water as well as our liaison to many park visitors that are having amazing experiences. And if the resource management staff, including myself, can help you find the right information if someone has a question, please feel free to get in touch and let us know. And also be aware that it's a good idea to subscribe to the Currents Marine Science Hub blog in order to stay up to date on marine science that's happening in Glacier Bay. That's all I have for now. Thanks and have a great summer.
Hello and welcome. My name is Chad Soyseth. I'm a fisheries biologist at Glacier Bay National Park. My counterpart is Craig Murdoch. It's possible that if you try to contact myself or him, you'll get one or the other of us. Today I'm going to talk to you about guided charter fishing in Glacier Bay National Park. I'm going to talk about how fishing in the park is different relative to areas outside the park. I want to recognize the guide's role, your guys' role in influencing client expectation and experience. And then finally, I'm just going to go over some of the concessions contract requirements and the reasoning behind those. Fishing in the park is different for other reasons as well. Our enabling legislation, establishing the park came about because scientist, ecologist William S. Cooper, who was early in the park, looking at how vegetation communities changed over time and at distances from glaciers, gave a talk to the Ecological Society of America. And they had a discussion after he talked about the importance of Glacier Bay as an area to do science. And the ESA, along with other scientists, were key in petitioning President Coolidge for protection of Glacier Bay. And essentially, Glacier Bay was established for the study of glaciation, animal movement, and ecosystem succession, among other things. The National Park Service management policies, it's a 2006 document that kind of rolls up the Organic Act, the Enabling Proclamation, and other regulation and guidance, requires us to monitor harvest. There's supposed to be no unacceptable impact to park resources or natural processes. Distributions, densities, or age class distributions, and no unacceptable impact to native species important to harvested species, or likewise native species using harvested species for any purpose. There's a long history of recreational fishing in Glacier Bay. These two middle panels I want to draw your eye to represent some of the earliest documentation of recreational fishing in southeast Alaska. There's a variety of clients aboard the steamship Spokane that if you look closely you can see that they've been hand lining halibut. There's a variety of halibut on the deck. So the Spokane came to Glacier Bay periodically in the early 1900s and visited Muir Glacier. Construction began on Glacier Bay Lodge in 1965. When it was completed shortly thereafter, Frank Kearns was the first concessions manager there. Here's Frank with a relatively large salmon. And this last panel on the right here, last image on the right, is an image that illustrates much the same activity as we see today in respective areas adjacent to the park. In terms of Glacier Bay halibut harvest, I just wanted to draw your eye to this graph. You can see that commercial harvest historically accounted for the lion's share of harvest. However, this has declined quite a bit, especially over the last decade. And one of the most important things that I wanted to emphasize is just that recreational and commercial harvest levels have been pretty comparable since 2011, and that's likely to continue on into the future. Collectively, we all need to collaborate to become better resource stewards. How can we work together to best ensure that the halibut resource and the industry continues on into the future? As guides, you guys have lots of power and authority. There was a study by Jason Gasper and others associated with the University of Washington, I think back in 2004, where they surveyed a variety of Gustavus clients and guides and questioned them in particular about fishing technique and guidance relating to large halibut release and the rationale behind that release. 140 clients and 13 guides participated in the survey, and 70% of the clients said that the guides encouraged them to release fish, and 90% of them cited a biological rationale. Larger females produce greater numbers of eggs, so you should release those fish. And half of clients actually releasing large fish said that one of the reasons they released those fish was because they were encouraged by the guide. The client openness to the guide messaging really influenced their willingness to release large fish. So just in looking at clients and guides, clients expect accurate and honest information from guides, especially in regard to regulations. Their personal beliefs and expertise will affect their receptivity to the guide influence, and ultimately they can influence guide behavior through tipping. Guides, in turn, provide and control the information they disseminate to clients. They really have an opportunity to educate clients. First and foremost, they construct and manage client expectation and experience. And whether they realize it or not, they consider the client's openness to their messaging when providing conservation perspective. Fishing under your contract. I want to hit just a few details of the requirements under your contract. There's no guided freshwater fishing authorized under your contract, with the exception of a couple of historical operators on the Dundas and Seclusion River. Why is this? Well, historically, guided fishing here in the park and in this area was marine-based. There was very limited freshwater demand, and freshwater fishing, guided fishing, would occur in designated wilderness, and there are requirements under the Wilderness Act and NEPA that would require us to first determine whether it's a necessary and appropriate activity, especially in relation to things like unguided fishing, and then how much level of use is realistic. We also have a few conservation concerns despite relatively conservative fish and game bag limits for these species of steelhead and cutthroat trout, whose populations can number from 50 to the low hundreds, particularly in small systems and newly emerged glacially influenced systems. We have a monthly sport fishing report requirement. Why is that? Because management policy requires us to conduct harvest monitoring, and even though you guys are required to report in charter logbooks, there's some issue with how well some of that information and the statewide harvest survey information agrees with the park information. So we're still kind of testing that. It works really well in Glacier Bay proper and Outer Coast, but not so well in Cross Sound, Icy Strait area. So I just want to focus on the survey reports. They're due the 5th of each month for the previous month. They're vessel trip and location based. Use one or more lines per each location that you stopped and fished at. Record the boat effort, not the individual angler effort, but the boat effort for all of the anglers at each fishing location by either salmon or bottom fish. And then report the species captain released at each location, and most importantly, or equally as importantly, I should say, report fishing effort even if there were no fish caught. Sharks exhibit relatively low reproductive capability with only up to maybe half a dozen pups per year. And one added benefit of not harvesting rockfish is that they tend to bioaccumulate relatively high mercury loads. We have an in-water halibut release requirement for those fish that you're planning to release. We urge you to follow best management practices for all intentional releases of all species. Why? Because it reduces unnecessary stress and mortality. There is an NPS regulation that requires careful and immediate release. Ultimately, a successful release and survival of that fish allows another angler the potential opportunity to catch that fish. Well, there's quite a bit of best management practices guidance online. Basically, they all boil down to the type of gear you use. There are certain gear types that are better than others. Hooking location, where the fish is hooked, determines its survival capability, as well as playing time and release methods. There's a couple of NPS links that you can look at here. There's other information online. Ultimately, if it just takes too long to release that fish, you know, one of the best things you can do is just cut the line above the hook. Eventually that hook will work its way out. There's a fish consumption advisory, and we would really appreciate if you would create client awareness for this. This is something that was produced by the State of Alaska Department of Public Health, and it's a guideline available online for Alaska women and children. And it relates to eating fish safely. Mercury harms developing nervous systems in unborn babies and in young children. This particular approach is a bioaccumulation-based point system. Eating fish is good, but not particularly old, long-lived fish, because they tend to really load up on that mercury. So we ask you to post this on board your vessel. Awareness enables individual action. And here's a link where you can download that. Finally, there's a couple of other non-contract items that I just want to touch on briefly. Firearms, firearm discharge, and use of other explosives like seal bombs and fireworks, as well as like bang sticks, are prohibited. Guides and visitors are prohibited from using firearms, bang sticks, or explosives for dispatching harvested fish, and hazing or killing wildlife. Why? Because hunting is not allowed in Glacier Bay National Park. National Park Service nationwide regulations prohibit discharge of firearms or other explosives. There are safety concerns with using these things. There are safety concerns with using these devices, and there can be an impact on sound quality, especially in regard to underwater sound. The Marine Mammal Protection Act prohibits marine mammal take. Use of seal bombs may be considered a take. Finally, guided anglerfish. There's a use restriction in terms of guided anglerfish. There's no guided anglerfish use in Glacier Bay proper. Why is this? Because we have a lifetime access permit fishery, commercial fishery there, that authorizes only qualifying fishers to continue fishing there for halibut for the remainder of their life. And non-LAP guided anglerfish use in Glacier Bay is contrary to the regulatory intent. So even though GAF is not authorized in Glacier Bay, it is authorized for outer waters. Lastly, have a great summer, you guys. Fishing is a great way for you and your clients to experience the park. Please.
Okay, hi, welcome back, or welcome to Glacier Bay. I'm Sarah Doyle, Outdoor Recreation Planner here at Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve. Today's presentation, I'll be talking to you about planning. The National Park Service periodically updates some of its park-specific management plans. Today we're talking about a planning proposal specific to Glacier Bay, where the park is proposing to renew the vision for visitor experiences, services, and park operations in Glacier Bay. We'll talk through the what, where, when, how, and why. And as a spoiler alert for those of you who know Glacier Bay well, similar to the icebergs, where what you see above water is just a fraction of what's available. If you go online, there's a lot to learn about how parks are managed, including Glacier Bay, and here's the website. So what is a management plan? It's an important tool that the Park Service uses to articulate strategies for the public enjoyment of national parks while ensuring its resources are protected, unimpaired for future generations. That relates to our Organic Act of 1916. It also helps the park set desired visitor experiences based on a unit's unique qualities and the values that merited national designation, and that also relates to Glacier Bay, our enabling legislation starting in 1925. Management plans also guide day-to-day decision-making by the National Park Service, our activities, our investment priorities, with transparency and accountability to the American public. So where is the Glacier Bay Front Country? It consists of around 7,000 acres of scenic rainforest and coastal waters in southeast Alaska, encompassing Bartlett Cove and surrounding non-designated wilderness lands and waters. Bartlett Cove is a point of connection for visitors making backcountry trips. Historically, it's been zoned as a focal point for visitor-related services and operations, with development to support higher intensity uses. It's also where the park's core administrative facilities and visitor services are located. And some of you who spend time here, you're familiar, we have the Glacier Bay Lodge, more recently the Hoonah Tribal House, a pretty unique humpback whale skeleton exhibit, and some of the front country trails that people enjoy spending time stretching their legs, including time off boats. The planning process, so when in 2016 we spent the summer season asking the public, asking a variety of stakeholders what they thought the vision for Bartlett Cove should be in the future. Then we've, for the last couple of years, been working on some internal planning tasks, reviewing comments, developing management alternatives as part of the National Environmental Policy Act requirements we have. We've analyzed impacts, prepared an environmental assessment, and selected a preferred alternative. And here in April 2019, we are about to release the proposal, the Front Country Management Plan, for a 30-day public and agency review, and hope to get people's attention and review. So how to be engaged. Over the next month, watch for the review, 30-day review notification. We'll have email, press release, flyers in local communities around the park, and also we'll have the plan and opportunities to submit official comments online. Here's the web address. And why submit comments? Our visitors and business partners have a really important perspective on how we manage this national park, and your continued interest and support is essential to helping the park enhance our visitor experiences while preserving its extraordinary natural and cultural heritage. So if you have questions or if you want more information, my contact information is posted here, and please get a hold of me. Have a great season. Thanks.
Thanks for watching the 2019 orientation video, and we look forward to seeing you this summer.